Episode 3, The Price of Truth. The morning air inside Dulles International Airport was sterile, smelling faintly of jet fuel, commercial floor wax, and the collective anxiety of 10,000 transient souls. At 10 o'clock, the terminal resembled a cathedral of cold glass and polished steel, a structure designed to make individual human lives feel inconsequential against the massive scale of global motion. Samuel Adeyemi walked through Terminal C not as a fugitive, but with the quiet, deliberate posture of a man who commanded the space he occupied. He had spent the last 48 hours running, fighting, and hiding in the shadows of a dirty warehouse. Under the passenger seat of his truck, he had kept a rudimentary survival kit, a clean button-down shirt, a cheap disposable razor, and a bottle of water. In a cramped, fluorescent-lit gas station restroom, he had transformed himself back into a civilized professional, shaving away the grime of physical conflict and combing his dark hair with damp fingers. Yet, no amount of cold water could wash away the profound exhaustion etched into the lines of his face or the hypervigilance that made his muscles twitch at every sudden sound. Beside him, Special Agent Foster maintained a brisk, rhythmic pace, his eyes sweeping the crowds with the practiced detachment of a federal lawman. Behind them walked Maggie Nguyen. Her face was a masterclass in emotional compartmentalization, a pale, rigid mask of controlled fury that hid a deeper, bleeding wound. Her brother Kevin had been left in the safe custody of 2 armed FBI agents in the terminal parking structure, finally warm, fed, and free of the paralyzing fear that had consumed him for 3 agonizing days. But for Maggie, the reckoning had only just begun. Conference Room 217 is at the absolute end of the concourse, Foster murmured, his lips barely moving as they walked. I have 4 plainclothes tactical agents inside, fully armed but disguised. 2 more are holding positions in the corridor, and another pair are covering the emergency stairwells. If Robert is looking for an ambush, he won't see it until the steel is already on him. And if he has his own security? Samuel asked, his voice low and gravelly. Then Dulles becomes a shooting gallery, and we have a monumental international incident on our hands, Foster replied flatly. They reached the frosted glass door of room 217. A temporary plastic sign hung from the brass handle, occupied. Foster didn't hesitate. He knocked 3 times in a quick, uneven cadence, the prearranged signal. After a tense, breathless second, the heavy door clicked and swung inward. Robert Nguyen stood in the threshold, and the contrast between this shattered figure and the arrogant billionaire Samuel had observed in the tropical luxury of Costa Rica was jarring. The impeccably tailored 3-piece suits were gone, replaced by a rumpled, sweat-stained linen shirt and gray trousers. His silver-streaked hair was uncombed, sticking up in disheveled tufts. He was pale, hollow-cheeked, and his eyes were deeply bloodshot from a prolonged lack of sleep or violent weeping. When Robert's eyes landed on Maggie, a spasm of raw, unadulterated shame distorted his features. Maggie, he whispered, his voice dry and hoarse. You actually came. I came, Maggie said. Her tone was devoid of warmth, flat and dead, the voice of a woman who had already mourned her family and was now merely performing the autopsy. She stepped past him without making eye contact. The conference room was tight and functional, dominated by a dark mahogany table, 6 chairs, and a broad panoramic window overlooking the concrete tarmac where a Boeing 777 was slowly taxiing. The 4 undercover FBI agents sat around the table, their laptops open and cardboard coffee cups strategically placed, but their posture was coiled, their hands resting naturally near the lapels of their jackets where their service weapons lay hidden. Robert returned to the head of the table, sinking into his chair as if his bones had turned to lead. Samuel sat directly across from him, while Maggie positioned herself at Samuel's right, forming a silent, united front. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound was the low, muffled hum of jet engines outside, vibrating through the double-paned glass like the heartbeat of a world that was entirely indifferent to their tragedy. Finally, Robert broke. I killed Thomas, he said. The confession did not burst from him in a fit of theatrical drama, it fell from his lips like a heavy stone dropping into deep mud. Maggie's hand, resting flat on the mahogany table, clenched into a tight fist. Her knuckles turned a translucent white, but her expression remained chillingly static. She had known this truth in her heart for days, but hearing it spoken aloud by her own blood was a different kind of violence. She had not come for a confession, she had come for the anatomy of a betrayal. "Why?" she asked. The single syllable was quiet, sharp, and lethal. Robert looked up, his eyes brimming with genuine tears. Samuel, who had spent a career evaluating human behavior in high-pressure construction environments, recognized the authenticity of his despair. This was not the calculated, performative grief Robert had displayed at Thomas's funeral. This was the absolute collapse of a man who had reached the end of his rope and found nothing but a void beneath him. "Because they gave me no other choice," Robert whimpered. The Blackwood Corporation. Specifically, Grace Blackwood. She approached me 3 years ago in Macau. They had detailed records of my gambling debts, $2.3 million, owed to syndicate creditors who don't issue formal collections. They send warning signs in cardboard boxes. Pieces of people you know. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically. Grace made the debts vanish overnight. Every penny. But it wasn't a gift. It was in purchase order. She bought me. She needed someone with the Nguyen surname, someone who could operate inside the family trust and guide the assets toward Blackwood shell companies during the transition. The Nguyen scission, we called it. A business decision, Maggie whispered, her voice trembling with a terrifying blend of grief and disgust. "You sold my husband's life to pay for your cards. I never agreed to his death." Robert cried out, his voice cracking violently as he reached out toward her across the table, only to recoil when one of the undercover agents made a subtle, warning movement. "They told me they were going to pressure him. They said they would scare him into signing the divestment papers. I didn't know about the brakes. I swear to God, Maggie, I didn't know they had paid a mechanic to sabotage the hydraulic lines of his car." "But you drove the car back to his garage that afternoon," Samuel intervened, his voice steady, cutting through Robert's hysteria. "You knew the vehicle had been modified. You encouraged Thomas to take the winding route through the Sacramento Hills that Thursday night. You paved the road for his execution, Robert." Samuel leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Let's put the guilt aside. You didn't request this meeting to seek forgiveness. You came because you are terrified, and you want a deal. What do you actually have to offer us?" Robert slowly lowered his hands, wiping his damp face with his sleeve. When he spoke again, a desperate, survivalist focus returned to his eyes. "I have their complete digital footprint. For 3 years, knowing that I was a disposable asset to Grace, I kept detailed ledger entries. Every transaction, every offshore routing number, every encrypted email, and the specific names of the corrupt regulatory officials they paid off in 5 different countries. I kept it all as life insurance." He reached slowly into his pocket, pausing to allow the tensed agents to relax, and pulled out a small, unmarked black USB drive, sliding it across the polished wood of the table. "It's all on there. Wire transfers, bank statements from Nauru and Zurich, even recorded phone conversations with Grace Blackwood and Diego Morales. It is enough to dismantle their entire global infrastructure." "And why hand it over now?" Samuel asked, keeping his eyes on the drive. "Because yesterday, after Maggie escaped from the Costa Rica estate, Diego decided I was a liability," Robert said, pulling back his right sleeve to reveal a thick white bandage, heavily discolored by dried blood. "He sent 2 contract killers to my hotel room in San Jose. I managed to escape through a service elevator, but one of their rounds caught me in the forearm. I flew commercial out of Miami with a forged passport, a bullet hole in my arm, and a bag of vending machine ice pressed against the wound. I have nowhere left to run. The Blackwoods are hunting me, and the federal government is my only shelter." "You want immunity," Maggie stated, her eyes locking onto him with absolute coldness. "Yes," Robert said. "Full transactional immunity. For the conspiracy, the financial fraud, and Thomas. Maggie stood up so suddenly that her chair shrieked against the linoleum. "No," she said, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You do not get to use my husband's murder as currency to buy your freedom. You do not get to walk away from this clean. Maggie, if I go down without a deal, the Blackwood lawyers will suppress this evidence." Robert pleaded. "They have federal judges in their pockets. You need my testimony to make any of this stick in a court of law." "I want you to rot," Maggie whispered, her chest heaving. Samuel placed a gentle, grounding hand on her arm, feeling the intense tension in her muscles. He looked up at Robert. "The U.S. Attorney General makes the final determination on immunity, Robert. That is far beyond our pay grade. But here is what we can offer you right now. We secure your physical safety, we present your cooperation to the Department of Justice, and in return, you tell us exactly where they are holding Amara. Today. Before they realize you've crossed the line." Robert blinked, looking genuinely bewildered. "Amara? Your wife?" "Samuel, I swear on my life, I didn't order her abduction. I didn't even know she had been taken until I landed in Miami." "But you know how Grace operates," Samuel pressed, his voice tightening. "Think, Robert. If she discovered you were compromised, where would she take leverage?" Robert's eyes darted toward the window, watching a massive jet lift off into the gray sky. Grace has 3 primary safe houses in the Washington metropolitan area, all registered under various shell corporations managed by Meridian Holdings LLC. One in Bethesda, one in Arlington, and a discreet 2-story row house on T Street in Alexandria. The Alexandria property is where she handles sensitive extractions. It's a low-profile, high-security location. If Amara is in D.C., she is at 847 T Street. Samuel stood up instantly, his chair scraping back. He looked at Agent Foster, whose phone was already pressed to his ear. "We need to move. Right now." The black FBI SUV roared down Interstate 395 south at over 90 miles per hour, its hidden strobe lights flashing behind the radiator grille. In the front passenger seat, Agent Foster was barked orders into his radio, coordinating with the Alexandria Police Department and the Regional FBI Hostage Rescue Team, HRT. In the rear, Samuel sat in absolute silence, his eyes closed, mentally dissecting the spatial mechanics of 847 T Street. He had never physically stood inside the property, but his engineer's mind had already constructed a highly accurate 3-dimensional schematic of the house based entirely on the 10-second video the kidnappers had sent to his phone. In that brief footage, Amara had been bound to a metal folding chair in a small room with exposed, peeling white concrete walls. Directly behind her, running vertically from floor to ceiling, was a 3/4-inch copper water pipe. To an ordinary observer, it was merely background clutter. To Samuel, a structural engineer who had spent decades analyzing municipal infrastructure, that single pipe was a blueprint. A copper pipe of that specific gauge, exposed and mounted against an exterior masonry wall, was characteristic of the cheap residential renovations performed on the historic row houses in South Alexandria built during the post-World War II expansion of the early 1950s. These narrow, deep-lot properties shared thick brick party walls. Because the renovation had been executed cheaply, the plumbing had been run externally rather than recessed into drywall, suggesting a rental property owned by an absent landlord who cut corners. The room was almost certainly a converted basement or a rear utility room on the ground floor, situated adjacent to the main water line entry at the front of the foundation. "Agent Foster," Samuel said, his voice cutting through the static of the police band. "The target house, is it a 2-story brick row house?"
No spoken dialogue.
"Narrow lot, built with a shared party wall." Foster paused, speaking quickly into his transmitter. To verify with the tactical team already on site. He turned back, his expression a mix of surprise and professional respect. "That's affirmative. 2 stories, red brick facade, built in 1952. How did you determine that?" "The copper line," Samuel explained simply. "It's a structural signature. If your tactical team attempts a standard dynamic entry through the front door, the narrow hallway will act as a fatal funnel. The guards will have ample time to use Amara as a physical shield or execute her before your team can clear the threshold. We need an alternative point of entry. The side windows are too small for tactical breaching, Foster muttered, studying a satellite map on his rugged tablet. And the rear alley is completely exposed. We don't have a clean angle. The house next door, 845, Samuel said, his eyes still closed as he visualized the street. Is it occupied? According to municipal records, it's currently vacant and undergoing a complete structural gutting, Foster replied. Then that is our entry, Samuel said, opening his eyes. The renovation means the shared attic space or the roof rafters will be exposed. If we can ascend the construction scaffolding on 845, we can penetrate the shared roofline, cross the brick party wall in the attic, and drop directly into the second floor hallway of 847, bypassing the front door security entirely. Foster stared at him for a long, silent moment, calculating the tactical risks. It's highly irregular. But it might be the only way to keep her alive. I'm assigning Agent Martinez to go in with you. She's HRT, sharp, and she knows how to clear a room. Agent Martinez, the compact, athletic woman Samuel had noticed in the Dulles conference room, leaned over from the front seat, a grim, professional smile playing on her lips. Let's see if you can keep up, engineer. When the SUV pulled up 2 blocks away from the target location, the neighborhood was deceptively peaceful, a quiet, tree-lined residential street where the morning sun filtered through the oaks. The tactical team had already established a cold perimeter, their unmarked vehicles sealing off the ends of the block. Samuel and Martinez slipped down the rear alleyway of 845, moving with silent, urgent steps. The scaffolding on the vacant building was standard steel frame construction. Samuel climbed first, his boots making no sound on the wooden planks, his movements fluid and precise, born of thousands of hours spent on active construction sites in Lagos and Houston. Martinez followed close behind, her suppressed Glock 19 drawn and held in a low-ready position. They reached the roofline, where the old slate shingles had been stripped away to reveal the rough plywood sheathing and the dark ventilation gaps of the attic. Samuel pried back a loose sheet of plywood, peering into the dark, dusty cavern of the shared attic. The air was hot and thick with the smell of old pine and fiberglass insulation. Moving carefully along the wooden ceiling joists to avoid stepping through the fragile plasterboard below, they crossed the boundary line between the two properties. The brick party wall had a narrow breach near the chimney stack, a common shortcut left by historical masons. Below them, through a small utility access panel in the ceiling of 847, Samuel could see the ground floor. 2 armed men stood near the front entryway, their postures tense, their attention focused entirely on the street outside. In the small utility room at the back of the hall, Amara was visible, tied to the metal chair. Her head was bowed, but she was breathing. She was alive. Samuel signaled to Martinez, pointing toward the ceiling hatch. The agent nodded, her expression hardening into absolute focus. Samuel slipped through the hatch first, dropping silently onto the carpeted landing of the second-floor stairs, his bare feet absorbing the impact. Martinez followed immediately, her weapon raised to cover the hallway. Samuel descended the wooden stairs with agonizing slowness, avoiding the squeaking treads near the wall. One of the guards, a stocky man in a tactical vest, was sitting in a kitchen chair with his back to the staircase, scrolling through his phone. Samuel crossed the final 3 feet of the corridor in a single, explosive motion, locking his forearm around the guard's neck in a tight, professional chokehold, while his other hand clamped over the man's mouth to stifle any scream. The guard thrashed violently, but Samuel held firm, maintaining the carotid pressure until the man's muscles went completely limp, and he slid quietly to the floor. The second guard, standing by the window, heard the faint rustle of clothing and spun around, his hand flying to his holstered pistol. Before he could clear leather, Martinez stepped around the corner. Her suppressed Glock coughed twice in rapid succession. The two small-caliber rounds struck the guard's upper thigh, shattering his femur. He collapsed onto the floor with a muffled shriek of agony, his weapon clattering away across the linoleum. "Breach! Breach! Clear!" Martinez shouted into her collar mic as the front door was blown off its hinges by the primary tactical unit outside. Armed agents flooded the hallway, immediately securing the wounded guard and neutralizing the threat. But Samuel was already running. He burst into the small back utility room, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Amara," he cried out. She looked up, her dark, expressive eyes wide with terror that instantly melted into profound disbelief. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. He was on his knees before her in an instant, using a pocket knife confiscated from the fallen guard to slash through the heavy zip ties binding her wrists. The moment she was free, Amara collapsed forward against his chest, her entire body shaking with deep, wrenching, guttural sobs. The immense psychological fortitude she had maintained for 3 long days of captivity finally gave way in the safety of his arms. Samuel held her tightly, rocking her back and forth, whispering soft, rhythmic assurances in Yoruba, the language of his childhood, of safety, and of home. "Mo wanibi," he murmured into her hair. "Mo wanibi. Ko si ohan tulu see, mo wanibi. I am here. I am here. Nothing can hurt you now." Amara clung to his shirt, her fingers digging into his back as if she were trying to anchor herself to reality. "I thought I would never see the children again," she sobbed. "I thought they were going to kill me in this house." "You're safe, Samuel," whispered, kissing her forehead, his own eyes wet with tears. "I promise you, you are safe now. I have you." By late afternoon, they had relocated to an FBI witness protection apartment in Arlington, a secure, nondescript flat with beige walls and heavy security locks. Amara sat on the worn fabric sofa, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, holding a steaming mug of chamomile tea. Her physical wounds were minor, deep bruising around her wrists and ankles, but the psychological toll of the abduction was evident in the way she flinched at the soft hum of the refrigerator. Samuel sat close beside her, his hand firmly interlaced with hers. "The children are safe in the adjacent room," he assured her gently. "They're sleeping. David stayed up waiting for you, but he finally crashed an hour ago." Nadia wouldn't go to bed without her stuffed elephant, but the agents managed to retrieve it from the truck. "They are protected, Amara. The nightmare is over." Amara stared into her tea, her voice soft and reflective. "You know, Samuel, when they took me in Houston, when they threw me into the back of that dark van, I didn't pray for a miracle. I didn't pray for God to strike them down. I just kept thinking about the day we first met at the University of Lagos teaching hospital." She looked up, a small, weary smile gracing her lips. "Do you remember? I was a brand new nurse, so nervous I could barely keep my hands steady, and I dropped a massive metal tray of surgical instruments in the middle of the orthopedic ward. The sound was deafening. It echoed down the entire corridor." Samuel smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through his exhaustion. "I remember. I was visiting Emeka after his leg surgery. I came around the corner and saw you on your knees, red-faced, trying to gather 50 different scalpels and forceps before the head matron saw you. And you didn't just walk past me like everyone else," she said, her eyes glistening. "You knelt down in the dust and helped me pick up every single piece. When you handed them back to me, you looked into my eyes and said, 'Don't worry. Everyone drops things. The only thing that matters is how we pick them up.'" She leaned her head against his shoulder. "That was the exact moment I knew I was going to marry you. And in that dark room in Alexandria, when I was tied to that chair, I kept repeating those words to myself. I knew you would come for me. Because you always help pick up what has been broken." Samuel squeezed her hand, his chest tightening with a powerful mixture of love and resolve. "They tried to destroy our lives, Amara. The Blackwoods. They killed Emeka, they killed Thomas, and they almost took you from me. We cannot let them remain in the shadows. We have to finish this. Then go, Amara said, her voice suddenly firming with a fierce, protective strength. Go to San Francisco. Get the evidence Thomas hid. Bring them down, Samuel. For Emeka, and for our family. I can't leave you if you don't feel secure, Samuel said, searching her face. I am secure, she said, looking toward the closed bedroom door where their children slept. Because I am their mother, and I know you are out there fighting for their future. Go. But promise me you will return to us. I promise, Samuel said, leaning down to seal the vow with a deep, lingering kiss. When Samuel stepped out into the small kitchen, Maggie was waiting for him, her coat already on. I'm flying to San Francisco with you, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Maggie, you've just escaped a kidnapping attempt, and your brother is in federal custody, Samuel cautioned. You need rest. That is my husband's evidence, Samuel. That is my family's legacy. I am not going to sit in an FBI safe house while you finish his work, she replied, her eyes flashing with a cold, determined light. We do this together. They boarded a commercial flight to San Francisco that afternoon. Samuel had used his remaining emergency line of credit to secure first-class tickets, seeking the relative privacy of the upper cabin. As the aircraft climbed through the clouds, the city lights of Washington fading into a vast sea of darkness below, Maggie turned to him. Why did you do it, Samuel? She asked, her voice hushed. When we were in that conference room in Costa Rica, and Diego was forcing me to sign those papers, you could have stayed silent. You were just a driver to them. You could have kept your head down, collected your salary, and walked away. Why did you speak up? Samuel looked out the window at the vast, dark expanse of the American continent. Because of my brother, Emeka, he said quietly. He was a brilliant young architect. He saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. He designed beautiful, affordable housing projects on napkins. And then, a corrupt construction project managed by the Blackwood Corporation collapsed, killing him instantly. At his grave, I swore I would make them pay. But I was powerless, a political refugee with no money, no status, and no voice. I carried that broken promise like a physical weight in my chest for 7 years. When Robert hired me, I recognized the Blackwood name on his correspondence. I took the job to spy on him, to find a crack in their armor. And when I saw you in that room, about to sign away your life and your children's safety to the same monsters who crushed my brother, I couldn't let it happen again. I had to stand up. Not just for Emeka, but for you. That is a terrible burden to carry alone, Samuel, Maggie murmured. It was, he said, looking at her. But I don't think I am alone anymore. They landed in San Francisco under a thick, rolling blanket of Pacific fog. The city was cold and damp, the streetlights reflecting off the wet asphalt of Pacific Heights. They took a taxi to the historic Victorian home Maggie had shared with Thomas, a grand, 3-story structure that had stood dark and vacant for 2 years since his death. The garden was overgrown, and a faded for sale sign leaned precariously against the wrought iron fence. Maggie unlocked the heavy oak door, her hand trembling slightly as the lock clicked. Inside, the house smelled of dust, old paper, and stagnant air. The furniture was draped in white dust sheets, giving the rooms the appearance of a graveyard for forgotten memories. She led Samuel down the wooden stairs into the unfinished concrete basement, where a massive, floor-to-ceiling wine rack stood against the rear foundation wall. Thomas was an avid collector, Maggie murmured, reaching behind a dusty bottle of 1982 Bordeaux on the third shelf. She pressed a concealed spring mechanism in the wooden backing. With a soft click, a secret compartment popped open, revealing a small, lacquer wooden box. Inside the box lay a brass safety deposit key, a sealed envelope, and a single photograph. The photo showed Thomas and Maggie on their wedding day, laughing beneath a canopy of white roses, their faces untouched by the tragedies that would later consume them. Maggie pressed the photograph to her chest, her eyes closing as a silent tear slipped down her cheek. Samuel stood by her side, offering his silent, respectful presence. After a moment, Maggie opened the sealed envelope. It contained a handwritten note from Thomas, written in a hurried, trembling script. They drove immediately to the Wells Fargo branch downtown. The bank manager, who had been pre-authorized by Agent Foster's emergency federal warrant, led them into the cold, steel-lined vault in the basement. Maggie inserted the brass key into box 4471. The lock turned with a satisfying, heavy click, and she pulled out the metal drawer. Inside lay a second, identical black USB drive. But beneath it was another envelope, sealed with red wax. On the front, written in Thomas's unmistakable hand, were the words, "For Samuel Adeyemi, T.O.B. opened by him alone." Samuel froze, his breath catching in his throat. His real name. Written by a dead man he had never met. Inside the taxi back to their hotel, Samuel tore the envelope open with shaking fingers. The letter was typed on Thomas's personal stationery. As his eyes scanned the words, the color slowly drained from Samuel's face, his jaw clenching in sudden, violent shock. "Samuel?" Maggie asked, alarm mounting in her voice. "What is it? What did he write?" Without a word, Samuel handed her the page. Maggie read the letter silently, gasping at the revelation that Thomas had known Samuel's true credentials as an engineer and had quietly protected him from Robert's background checks. "I forgive you, Samuel," Maggie said quietly when she finished. "We were both trapped in a game we didn't design. You saved my life, and you saved my children. That is the only truth that matters now. Let's go back and finish this." The next morning, they returned to Washington, D.C., and went straight to the secure FBI headquarters. Foster met them in the high-security briefing room on the 4th floor, where a team of 6 intelligence analysts sat before a massive digital projection screen mapping the global reach of the Blackwood Corporation. "We have fully imaged both USB drives," Foster announced. "The data is revolutionary. It details a multi-billion-dollar money laundering network operating through infrastructure projects across 14 countries. And at the absolute center of this spiderweb is Grace Blackwood." Suddenly, the red emergency phone on the conference table began to ring. Foster answered it, his expression shifting from calm authority to absolute, frozen horror in a matter of seconds. The Virginia Protective Custody Facility had been breached. Robert had been shot twice and was in critical condition. There was a mole deep within the bureau. Before they could move, the heavy wooden door of the conference room swung open. A man in a charcoal suit stepped into the room, Daniel Vance, accompanied by 2 corrupted agents who immediately raised their weapons. Vance held up a phone displaying a live tactical feed of Amara and the children in Arlington under sniper scopes. Samuel looked at Maggie. In her eyes, he saw no panic, only an unyielding determination. She gave him a microscopic nod. She slipped off her heavy, steel-shanked designer heel and pressed it into his hand as they were escorted down the quiet corridor toward the evidence locker. The moment they reached the narrow corridor adjacent to the electrical maintenance room, Samuel acted. He spun around, driving the steel-shanked heel directly into the high-voltage master circuit box. A blinding blue arc erupted with a deafening crack, vaporizing the circuits and plunging the entire wing into pitch-black darkness. In the sudden confusion and smoke, Vance's guards fired blindly, but Samuel had already pulled Maggie to the floor. Crawling through the dark, Samuel tackled Vance, pinning him to the concrete wall and knocking the control phone from his grip. A split second later, Agent Martinez and a team of loyal tactical operators blew open the service door with a small, controlled charge, neutralizing the rogue agents. "Arlington has been secured," Martinez shouted over the blaring alarms. "Your family is completely safe, Samuel." Samuel let out a long, shuddering breath. The empire of the Blackwoods was finally in ruins. He looked at Maggie, who stood in the smoke with a victorious, warm smile. They had won. They stood tall together as the sirens wailed, ready to step out into the clean, victorious morning light.